But tonight on Signal, thousands of Central American migrants await their fate just south of the U.S. border. Plus, one of the scientists behind the new U.S. climate assessment claps back at the critics, including the one in the Oval Office. Then, why America's wild horses are under threat. But first, today's big story, guys. President Trump's longtime personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, admitted he lied to Congress about Trump's business dealings. According to federal prosecutors, Trump was negotiating real estate deals with Russia well into his 2016 campaign. And it all comes down to this Trump Tower project in Moscow. Cohen told Congress they ended that deal long before the primaries, but now he's saying it was still going even after Trump secured his nomination. And tonight, a new BuzzFeed report says Trump's company was planning to give a $50 million penthouse in that tower to Putin himself, then charge oligarchs a fortune to live in Putin's building. Now, one of BuzzFeed's sources was Cohen's business associate, Felix Sater, who came up with the plan. Now, all this is the latest in a slew of developments out of the special counsel's office this week, and it's a lot to follow. So Anna Schechter from NBC's investigative unit is breaking it down.
Thanks, Simone. Let's start here with Julian Assange, Roger Stone, and Jerome Corsi. Julian Assange runs WikiLeaks. He is the person who released all of those tens of thousands of DNC emails. Roger Stone, a Trump associate in that inner circle in the summer of 2016, was desperately trying to find out exactly what Assange was going to be releasing. He sent Corsi an email saying, "Get to Assange," meaning go fly to London, go to the Ecuadorian embassy, see Assange, and figure out what's coming. Paul Manafort and Rick Gates. Manafort is in a world of hurt. He was running Trump's campaign during that key period that Mueller is looking into to find out if there was collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian hackers. Manafort has pleaded guilty, but Mueller just told the world that he actually has continued to lie to investigators, so his whole plea negotiations have broken down. So Rick Gates was Manafort's deputy. Gates has already pleaded guilty to a variety of financial crimes. A couple of other players who have also pleaded guilty, George Papadopoulos and Michael Flynn, both to lying to investigators. Papadopoulos has already started serving his 2-week sentence. And the biggest news of today, Michael Cohen. He's just pleaded guilty to a new charge related to real estate dealings with Russia. Remember, Michael Cohen was a lawyer for the Trump Organization, and he is cooperating with Mueller's investigators. So he's given them a trove of information to work with. A key part of the Mueller investigation, the Trump Tower meeting that you all have heard of. Rob Goldstone is a publicist who's been connected to Donald Trump. He's known him for years. Goldstone reached out to Donald Trump Jr. saying he could get him dirt on Hillary Clinton. And who could give it to him? This Russian lawyer, Natalia Veselnitskaya. So in June of 2016, the top people in the Trump campaign meet with Natalia Veselnitskaya, and it was all over this promise that Veselnitskaya was going to be able to give dirt on Hillary Clinton. Okay, so to wrap this up, the Mueller investigation is picking up speed. We're seeing new breaking news every single day. We're expecting a report from him, but there is no exact timeline. There's no deadline for him. We still need to wait and see the rest of what Mueller's got and see if he actually can prove collusion.
Thanks so much, Anna. All right, President Trump spending the next few days at the G20 summit in Buenos Aires. Now, given the rising tensions in the Russia-Ukraine crisis, he canceled his planned meeting with Putin. But the biggest issue for the U.S. this weekend is actually our relationship with China and that simmering trade war. MSNBC's Ali Velshi has the details on what's at stake for Americans here.
What? Oh, all right. Let me tell you about the G20, first of all. The G20, I guess you might want to call it the G48, because it's really 19 countries plus the European Union. They're going to meet in Buenos Aires this week. But the big issue really is what's going on between the United States and the rest of the world, particularly with this country here, China. That is where we do most of our trade. So now this trade war with China, where we've imposed tariffs, which are costs on importing goods from China, and they've imposed costs on goods that and services that we sell to China, is increasing increasing costs for everybody. A conservative group, the Koch brothers, they funded a study that says the average American family is going to be paying $2,400 more on average over the next year because of the cost of everything that's more expensive, including iPhones, by the way, which come from China. It's an American company, but they're Chinese made. Take a look at Apple's stock since the talk of this trade war came into place. It's recovered a little bit, but it has really suffered as a result of the discussion of putting a tariff on the iPhone. Imagine these expensive iPhones costing 10% more, 15, 20, maybe even 25% more. You're going to find some alternative. You're going to buy a phone, possibly, that is made somewhere else. But it's not just that. We've got soybeans, we got steel, we got electronics coming from China. Now, there's a while for which this kind of a trade war can go on, and maybe good things come out of it in the end, but people around the world are really worried about the costs. If you have to replace everything you're buying from China with more expensive goods, even if they're made in America, and that might make you feel really good, it will be more expensive because labor costs in the developed world, and in particular in America, are much, much, much higher than they are in China.
All right, here are some of today's headlines briefly. The Department of Veterans Affairs promised they would pay back hundreds of thousands of vets after their GI Bill benefits fell short. So here's what happened. There was a change in the way housing allowances are calculated for student vets, and that apparently caused a computer glitch, and some people were paid less than they were owed. But now, weeks later, NBC has learned they won't get reimbursed. Two committee aides told NBC this and asked not to be identified. But the reason why there won't be reimbursements, they say if the VA did it in this case, they'd have to audit all previous education claims, and there are around 2 million. Now, the person who oversees this, Paul Lawrence, was criticized by members of Congress today. Lawrence said NBC's report was misleading and that all vets would be, quote, made whole. But later he said the agency didn't plan to pay veterans based on the new rates, the ones under that new Forever GI Bill, until spring 2020. All right, one newspaper over in the UK is sending a message on their front page, or lack thereof. The Scottish newspaper, The National, chose to leave it blank to prove a point after their reporters were barred from attending a press conference. Now, it features a silhouette of Prime Minister Theresa May with the words, "We were not allowed into her press event with the other newspapers. We have refused to cover it." Now, May's press office said limited capacity was the reason to blame for all this. Looks like Trump isn't the only world leader with a complicated, shall we say, relationship with the press. All right, the Chinese government put a temporary stop to research involving gene editing today. It's happening after this Chinese researcher claimed he used the gene editing technology known as CRISPR to alter the genes of twin girls that were born this month. Now, he said he did it to stop HIV from being passed down by the girl's father. But if it's true, I mean, this would be unprecedented. Scientists around the world are furious over it, and they're also not sure he actually pulled it off. A team in China is now looking into the claims. He admitted that another gene under pregnancy is underway and being monitored. Now, on to this. Everyone wants a piece of Hef, at least according to the auction house that's trying to sell the late Playboy founder's stuff. Hugh Hefner died last year at the age of 91, and now some of his most iconic items are headed for auction. Everything from his pipes, that red smoking jacket, the first issue of Playboy with Marilyn Monroe, and of course his iconic captain's hat. Now, the one item not for sale, the Playboy Mansion. His home already sold for $100 million in 2016 to the heir, get this, of the Twinkie fortune. And those are your headlines, briefly.
This grave constitutional crisis thing.
The people in the room, they gasped. It then became clear what this was about. That's really, to use a legal expression, that's when the hit the fan.
This is a story that is not well known.
What stuck in my mind about it was this was in the White House.
And the fact of the matter was, he was a crook.
Oh my God.
But it really should be, especially maybe now.
Rachel Maddow and MSNBC present Bagman. Listen for free wherever you get your podcasts.
We're following up on a story that's captured everyone's attention this week: chaos at the border. On Sunday, a few hundred migrants from a caravan of over 6,000 Central Americans tried to rush the border crossing between San Diego and Tijuana. Now, the rest stayed behind in Mexico, and now they're trying to figure out next steps. NBC News producer Annie Rose Ramos is at the San Ysidro port of entry. Annie Rose, I want to check in with you here and just find out, how did the events that unfolded on Sunday affect things there? Are things different now? Is that what you're hearing?
Yeah, hey, Simone. So what started out as a peaceful march of migrants here just on the other side of this border, we're trying to get to the port of entry right here, quickly turned chaotic when Mexican officials blocked the bridge leading to this port of entry. So what migrants did was they rushed around it, they rushed through a river, and at one point tear gas was deployed. Now, Sunday's events caused these migrants to really see how difficult it's going to be to get to this port of entry. What it was a wake-up call, one might say, in order to reach the United States. And so U.S. officials have already said that 3,000 migrants are waiting on the other side of this port of entry, and that they were there before this caravan even got here. And so migrants are deciding whether or not they want to stay in Mexico and seek a better future for themselves there, or some, like a couple of hundred, have signed up to self-deport, voluntarily deport to their home countries back in Central America.
Now, I know you've been at the border covering this story for some time now. Can you tell me about some of the individuals that you're meeting? Tell us a little bit about the makeup of the caravan at this point.
So the majority of the makeup of this caravan is made up of men. It's unique in this sense, in that caravans that we've seen before have been majority women, children, families seeking a better future in the U.S., fleeing political violence or gang violence. But this time we're seeing men who are individuals, they're traveling by themselves, some young, some old, who say they can't find a job back in their home countries. They say they want to go to the United States, get a job, and send money home back to their families in Central America.
So we're hearing that the migrants announced a hunger strike. Obviously, they're trying to send a message here, but who are they trying to send that message to?
Yeah, exactly right. This morning, 50 migrants from the caravan announced a hunger strike. Now, it's led by mothers. The women say that they are trying to bring attention not from just the United States or Mexico, but the international community. From the United States, they seek a faster process, a speedy process in order to apply for asylum. From Mexico, they seek better shelter conditions. Right now, these mothers say they're sleeping on the floor in a rundown stadium, over 6,000 people. Children are getting sick. There's an outbreak of disease. Toilets are overflowing with human waste. Conditions are unbearable. And from Mexico, they seek a better and more permanent condition in terms of shelter. And lastly, from the international community, on the other side, Tijuana has said that they have run out of resources to host these migrants, these thousands of people. And so from the international community, they seek aid. So really, it's just a call to action from people in power to come to the help of these migrants.
All right, Annie Rose, thank you so much. Moving on now to California's deadliest fire, which left behind staggering devastation. And after almost 3 weeks, first responders are calling off the search for human remains. Nearly 200 people are still unaccounted for. And officials said, given the power of the fire, some residents just may never be found. Now, the science community says climate change will only continue to intensify these wildfires. And another scary climate change report came out just last Friday. It was commissioned by Congress, but President Trump said he doesn't believe it one bit. And he's not the only politician to try and discredit the findings. One of the authors of the report, climate scientist Katharine Hayhoe, debunked the president's claims in a thread on Twitter, writing, "Climate science isn't a religion. It's real, whether we believe in it or not." Now, it might surprise you to learn Katharine Hayhoe is religious herself. She's a devout Christian, married to a pastor, and travels the country speaking to evangelical congregations about the reality of climate change. We sat down with her and another scientist, Ed Maybach, to find out why it's so hard for some Americans to accept climate science.
It's been 50 years since scientists felt confident enough that we know it's real and it's serious, and we have to act now, and warned a U.S. president of the dangers of climate change. Over 50 years ago, that was Lyndon B. Johnson. So how did we come to be in a state where the number that a thermometer gives us is somehow different if we vote liberal or conservative?
The majority of Americans actually do believe that climate change is real and that it's human-caused, but there's this knee-jerk reaction because Republicans believe that, well, climate change policies, that's a Democrat thing. So therefore, I can't support it.
It wasn't always the case, and that's a really important thing to recognize. Republicans and Democrats had similar perceptions of climate change. Approximately 2 out of 3 of both groups saw climate change as real and problematic. But over the past 2 decades, Democrats have moved in one direction, becoming increasingly more convinced that this problem is real, it's human-caused, it's serious, and Republicans, unfortunately, have moved in exactly the opposite direction. Many people are hearing from their elected officials that the kinds of solutions would be worse than the nature of the problem.
When you have Democrats and Republicans agreeing on these foundational truths that climate change is real and it's human-caused, the disagreement comes around the solutions.
It does. And I found this because often when you start conversations, people will throw up sciencey sounding objections like it's just a natural cycle or climate has always changed. Or they'll throw up religiously sounding objections like God said there will always be seasons or the world's going to end anyways. But if you let them keep on talking, within less than a minute, just about every single person will naturally transition from those sciencey or religiously sounding arguments to, I don't want the government setting my thermostat, telling me what type of car I can or can't drive.
I don't want paper straws, right? That's the latest one that we've been hearing. So, Catherine, you go around the country and you speak to a lot of different kinds of people, but you speak to a lot of faith-based groups. Is your mission to target those who are really staunchly, believing that climate change isn't real?
No, it absolutely isn't. Because for those people, rejecting the science of climate change is such an integral part of their identity that unless they want to change, they will not. My personal definition for dismissive is somebody who, an angel of God with brand new tablets of stone could appear before them saying global warming is real, and they still wouldn't change their mind. So rather than talk to the 9 or 10% of the population that is truly dismissive, I talk to the rest of us, the 70% who feel like it's a distant issue in space or time. It only matters to people who live far away or future generations or polar bears up in the Arctic. I talk to those people because for those people, it isn't a case of instilling new values. I truly believe that we already have all the values we need to care. Nobody has taken the time, though, to connect the values we have to a changing climate.
If the biggest challenge for people like yourselves is getting people on both sides to be on board with solutions, how do you go about doing that?
I try not to be policy prescriptive, but I try to lay out all the solutions for people to show them that, you know what, there's actually libertarian solutions to climate change. There's free market solutions, there's bipartisan solutions, there's technological solutions, and even just giving some examples of things that are already happening today can often surprise people and inspire them.
What's so interesting to me is how a lot of people in this country seem to selectively reject science. You're not going to reject science when it's a cure that's going to save your life. But when it's climate science, that's a lot more convenient for a lot of people. Why is that?
3/4 of Americans will not even try to name a single living scientist. The point being, we don't know scientists by and large. And how can you trust people that you don't personally know? We trust our friends and family members most. Our friends and family members don't know a whole lot about global warming. We trust the politicians who we entrusted by voting for them. We trust them a lot.
Just about every single person I have ever met does not truly believe that basic science is incorrect, but they believe that the proposed solutions to climate change are fundamentally opposed to their ideology, their values, and their welfare.
And finally, tonight, in the lore of the American West, there are few things as iconic as wild horses. But right now, the future of these Broncos is under threat. Seriously, it's a matter of life or death, all thanks to a teeny tiny policy change. Chase Kane from NBC LA spent a couple days with these stallions in question.
These views with majestic horses running wild, it's priceless, right? Well, but get this. The federal government might say, nah, these horses are only worth a few bucks each, $1 even, and gone, sold to foreign markets for horse meat. That's the very big consequence of a very small shift in policy under the Trump administration. So why is a tiny change, and we're talking something without even a paper trail, going to make it so easy to sell off America's wild horses for slaughter? Because you're probably thinking it's illegal to slaughter horses in the U.S., and you're right. And we'll get back to that.
Navigate to Modoc National Forest.
First, I want to understand why the government would want to do anything except let these horses run wild.
If I was a horse and I was looking at this grass and I used my mouth to just kind of get a mouthful of that and see where it's been chewed on, they tried to eat it and didn't like it.
So that's part of the problem. These clumps of dry grass bunched up. The grass the horses should be eating is chewed down to the dirt, and it's underneath what rangers tell me are invasive grasses that are actually harmful to horses. And their watering holes aren't much better with California's relentless drought. Forest rangers say this is all evidence of why there should only be about 400 horses here, not nearly 4,000.
It would just take one really hard winter to have a highly detrimental impact, something none of us want to watch.
Hundreds of horses dying.
If not thousands.
So this is the point where a helicopter flies by. We're witnessing the final day of this massive roundup of wild horses. And it works like this. The helicopter spooks the horses. They run unknowingly between these fences that look like brown cloth, which get narrower until they're corralled inside a pen.
Let's say you did nothing and just let nature take its course. What would that mean?
I don't know. And I don't know if lack of management is I mean, that's still a choice. I've been here 4 winters now. We haven't had a hard winter with deep snow. I don't really want to think about what that would look like with 4,000 horses.
Of course, I wonder what they'll do with these 932 they've now rounded up. First, they'll try to adopt them, and anyone would have to sign a form promising the horses won't be slaughtered. But after 60 days, if the horses haven't been adopted, well, this is where it gets complicated. Let me try to explain. Horse slaughter is illegal in the U.S., but other countries like horse meat. So privately owned American horses are sometimes sold abroad for slaughter. That is legal. Now, with wild horses, there are 2 groups, different only because of where they roam. Most are managed by the Department of the Interior, and federal law prevents them from being slaughtered. But some live on land managed by the Department of Agriculture. Agriculture doesn't have rules on horse sales, but always followed what Interior did with its wild horses until now.
This is a big change in Forest Service policy.
Ellie Price and her husband rescued the 200 wild horses now living here on the Montgomery Creek Ranch north of Napa Valley. All were rounded up from federal lands.
And to be clear, previous administrations, Republican or Democrat, have not done this.
Never. No, never.
Ellie's president of one of 2 animal rights groups now suing the Forest Service, and that's under the Department of Agriculture, to protect horses like these.
They have chosen a path that is not sustainable, and what they need to do is use birth control.
Why won't they just do that?
They have been very resistant to doing that because that would require managing them on an annual basis of bringing the horses in and darting them to keep them from having more babies.
But forest rangers don't see it quite like that.
And when you're supposed to have 200 to 400 and you have 4,000, almost 4,000, birth control doesn't fix what's occurring out on the landscape. There's just a lot of horses out there, and the land just can't sustain it.
So the Forest Service seems pretty set on how to handle this, unless a federal judge in San Francisco steps in.
It's worked for 30 years.
That's why Chris Berry's working to buy him more time.
It's unthinkable to me that the Forest Service will ultimately be able to go forward with this. The Forest Service didn't go through anything that we would recognize as an appropriate process to perform this sort of dramatic U-turn in policy. It's not only immoral and outrageous, it's also illegal.
And he's got big names on his side. Senators Kamala Harris, Dianne Feinstein, dozens of California legislators have all written letters to the Forest Service. A couple weeks ago, California's Attorney General even threatened criminal charges.
And I'm doing the best I can to manage my herd within the existing law.
There's 5 horses that are left at the end of this, and they end up in another country being slaughtered. That has to hurt to even think about that.
I'm an animal lover. We feel like what we're doing is the most humane thing. And I know not everybody gets it, but we're doing what we think's right.
Horse slaughter is a brutal, terrible thing. I don't know how they've gotten to this point. They are exploiting a technical loophole.
The Forest Service has adoption info online and says that's a priority. They say it's about balancing care of the horses with the health of the natural resources and the communities that depend on this land. But if the horses aren't adopted by January and a judge doesn't step in, these symbols of the American West might be shipped abroad.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thanks so much for watching. We will see you next week.